Hey everybody, it's Monday, May 12th, and it's actually my sister's birthday, so I want to give a special shout out to you, Jess, even though you're probably not listening. And everybody else, I hope you guys enjoyed the show today. Hey guys, welcome to the Business and Bootstrapping podcast, where we believe in busting your ass and bootstrapping your startup to build the business and life of your dreams. I'm your host, Matt Ward, and if you enjoyed the show today, please check us out at businessandbootstrapping.com to get more great tips, tricks, and interviews with successful entrepreneurs. Thanks, and let's get started. Welcome to the Business and Bootstrapping podcast. Today, I'm pretty excited to have on David and Carrie McKeegan of Greenback's Tax Services. This crazy couple decided to quit their jobs in the financial services industry to gallivant around the world and start a business helping expats deal with their taxes. And I just wanted to get them on the show because they have a pretty amazing story, and I think they can help a lot of the audience. So thanks so much for coming on, guys.
Great. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
So where are you guys at right now? I hear you guys are abroad.
Yep, we are living in Bali, Indonesia, so Southeast Asia.
That's crazy. So the first thing that I wanted to go into with you guys was basically to get a little bit more background into your story. So you both started out in the financial industry. Why did you really decide to go about creating Greenback Tax Services? And when did you really make the jump to start your own business?
Sure. Yeah, I can explain a little on that. So, we were both in the financial services industry, as you said. Dave was more on the finance side. I was more on the marketing side. And, we both were actually really enjoying our day-to-day lives there. But we were finding that we were at a bit of a crossroads. So we really wanted to be traveling more, seeing more of the world. We were living in London at the time, which allowed us to actually see a lot of Europe. But, you get good vacation time in London, but it's not the same as living in a different place every year. And we also really wanted to set up our own business. So what we decided to do is to pursue that simultaneously. So to start thinking about what we could be doing and looking at potential business ideas while we were still employed, so that once we were ready to make the leap, we really kind of felt like we had the grounding we needed to get us started.
Okay, so you're working on building something on the side, you're moonlighting. What are some of the ideas you guys came up with in terms of starting a business and really getting out there on your own?
We actually, we started out the process by sitting down and coming up with a list of 100 different business ideas we thought we could run. And we had everything on there from starting a snow cone business on the beach in Brazil to selling funny T-shirts and all this kind of stuff. And we just started eliminating the ideas that didn't really match our career goals or things we couldn't do location independent.
For us, we literally said there's no such thing as a bad idea. So even when some things came up, it was like, nope, just throw them on there. Friends would come up with ideas. We would, we were just kind of brainstorming. But we had criteria in mind. So we came up with the whole list. And then we had criteria in mind around what it was, would be the right idea. And to be honest, it took us a while to get the idea for this particular business. And once we did, we didn't need to go through the list of criteria to know this was what we wanted to do. It was like, oh, well, of course, this is something that fits everything we want. It's a good service. It's something that people need. It's something we need. It's something we know how to do. And it allows us to do it from anywhere in the world. So, even though we kind of came up with all these principles around it, once we spotted the right idea, we didn't need to do a lot more analytics. It just felt like a good fit.
So you're getting this experience working in the financial industry, and it's not too related to what you guys are doing now with working. You're basically doing tax for people living abroad, still stuck in the U.S. tax structure. How did you guys really go about kind of vetting the idea? Did you guys do any kind of customer discovery or pre-selling to make sure that people would actually pay for this?
We didn't, but we had been talking a lot to a number of our friends about it. Expat groups tend to be close-knit. If there's 3 Americans living in London, they probably know each other. And, we started asking around and started to realize that we weren't the only people living in London who were frustrated by having to deal with the U.S. tax side of things. And, when you start talking to people and you start figuring out that some of them are paying you £2,000-3,000, which at the time was $5,000 or $6,000 each year to have their U.S. taxes done, or other people have, their Uncle Jimmy doing it, and, they get a letter every other month from the IRS because Uncle Jimmy doesn't know what he's doing. You start to realize that there's a real market there.
And we did set up a proof of concept. So what we decided is that we would set up the whole business so it would run. So we would, we literally did everything from, hiring an accountant to, setting up the systems to the email templates and that whole exercise. And then we had, I think it was a 3 or maybe 5 month kind of proof of concept period where we said, if we don't hit certain thresholds during that time, it means that this idea is a bust. So we didn't go from idea to kind of full blown. We had an interim step that allowed us to evaluate with some very real metrics that we held ourselves accountable to.
I think that's really important for people. They're working on building something. And you guys were doing this while you still had your jobs in corporate, correct?
Yes.
What were some of the metrics that you guys focused on? How did you know when you were ready to make that jump or that leap of faith? How was your planning?
Income, so the most obvious one. So the idea, if a lot of people came to our website or a lot of people responded, but, you didn't get paid at the end of the day, that it really wasn't a good idea. So we very much focused on that. But, we both came from MBA backgrounds, and we both came from very structured environments. So, we probably had 10 different metrics we were looking at to show, kind of what the key performance indicators are around interest levels, all the way to, how well we can execute against the idea, then all the way to, how much money we were spending on marketing per new customer that came in, and how much we were making per new customer that came in, and how satisfied those customers were and how likely they were to come back. So we really did kind of measure pretty religiously.
Yeah.
So you went about it in the real left brain analytical style of, I'm going to make sure I keep track of this and this and this. And once the risks are balanced out with the rewards, then it's time to really go for it.
Yeah, because I think it's very easy as an entrepreneur to get really caught up in how wonderful an idea is and get excited about it and forget to try to see whether or not other people feel the same way. So, there's another business line idea that we looked at where we didn't use some of that left brain thinking and just thought, oh, this is great, this is great, this is great. And then all of a sudden we got to the point where we did the analytics and we're like, actually, no one else thinks so. So, I think that it's important for people to use both sides of their brain on that. But if you don't have the metrics that show you how something's doing, it's pretty hard if you're real emotional about something to really know if it's a good idea or not, really know if you're delivering, even if it's a good idea, if you're delivering well upon it.
Yeah, you're always emotionally invested in those ideas you came up with. What was your first initial plan that you guys worked on, and how much time did you spend until you realized that it was kind of just a waste?
It was actually something that we ran about a year after we started the business as sort of a passion project side by side. So this was our kind of first thing. That was something else that we pursued. I don't know how much we can talk about it because it was a licensing deal with an existing company.
It's still a going concern, but basically what we were doing was selling a product for a U.S. company in the UK. And it became very apparent very quickly that we weren't getting a whole lot of support from the U.S. company. And we really liked the product. We thought it was a great idea. We thought it was wonderful in a lot of ways. But at the end of the day, it wasn't making any money and it was taking up a lot of time. So we ended up having to just cut that one out.
It's like the 80-20 principle where you figure out where you're making money, where you're not, and then just focus on that. And that's really one of the things that I hear a lot.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you guys both did your MBAs. What was your experience? I know you guys actually, even before that, so you're both living in the States and you decide to jump abroad to Barcelona to go do MBAs. What made you guys make this jump? What was kind of your motivation?
Well, I think, we were at a point in our careers, both of us, where we wanted to pursue an MBA. So we knew we wanted to do that. And we looked a lot at, at staying in, we were living in New York City, and we looked a lot at staying and going to somewhere like Columbia to do our MBAs, either to do it at night or to do it full time. And I think, to be honest, probably the big turning point was when right after September 11th, you just did a lot more soul searching. So we were living in the city at that point, and all of a sudden it was, well, is that really what we want to do? Or is that kind of first we're going to do an MBA and then we're going to move abroad and then we're going to do this? Why not do something a little bit more risky, still within the context of something smart? I mean, you're still going and doing an MBA, but, do something a little more risky where you move abroad. And somehow at a point in our lives where, we'd had just kind of a bit of flux and a lot of things changing, it all of a sudden seemed like something that you could sort of get yourself to do. Whereas before we were much more focused on U.S. traditional business school, staying in the kind of career paths we were in. I don't know, Dave, is that your recollection too?
Yeah, it was sort of, we wanted to do it a little bit different than the way other people were doing it. And we wanted to have a bit more adventure out of it. And if you look at the idea of going to NYU at night and continuing your day job, that's a miserable 3 years. And you compare that against quitting your job, moving to Barcelona, and doing a full-time MBA with people from all these other countries where you're learning from them as well as learning from the regular textbook learning. And it was just a much better option.
Do you guys think if you hadn't gone abroad, hadn't gone to Barcelona, you would even be in this position where you had your own business, or would you guys still be in corporate America?
I think we probably would have taken the leap. So we were, even at the same time we were talking about, doing our MBAs, we were talking about the next step after that being living abroad. And we both are pretty entrepreneurial by nature. I mean, if you talk to either of our parents, from when we were very little, we were doing things that implied, starting our own business. But I don't know. It's a lot riskier, I think, when you try to do everything at once. I think for us, moving abroad and then, doing it in stages was just a lot easier.
So speaking of doing it in stages, you're working on building your business at night. And then you take the leap and you go full time into the business. I want to say, David, you jumped in first and then Carrie came in after. Can you guys kind of take us back to the inception of Greenback, and then as it started to grow, give us a little rundown of how the business went?
Sure. We actually were both very into the idea from the beginning. The way it played out was I was working for HBOS at the time, which, as some of the listeners may know, is now part of Lloyd's banking group. They were one of the victims of the financial crisis. So they started asking if anybody wanted a voluntary redundancy package. And it was sort of one of these too good to pass up offers, because the financial service industry was going into recession, or arguably already in recession. So the opportunity cost was pretty low. So we talked about it quite a bit and decided that it would make sense for me to leave HBOS and work on Greenback full time. Carrie was working with me at night and weekends, and she was also getting ready to go off on maternity leave. And that basically, in the UK, you get 12 months maternity leave. So she was going to be able to work on the business potentially during that time anyway, or at least be around to bounce ideas off of and things like that. So, we sort of had the safety net of Carrie still having a job, but we were able to live overseas while we were really getting the business up and running.
So we actually, went back after my maternity leave. You'd been running the business for a year. Decided we were going to move back to London, and we were going to, I was going to restart my work at Barclays, and then thought it through a little bit more and said, hey, this is actually going real well. We're past, some of the projections we had. Let's make the leap a little sooner. So we had everything kind of planned out in terms of how long it would take each of us to make that move, and then jumped the gun a little bit once we started seeing good results.
What were some of the fears that you guys had when you're jumping the gun, when you're kind of basically jumping off very successful careers? You're working in London in the banking industry. Sure, the industry's going down, but what are you guys thinking? What are some of the kind of more internal conversations you're having with yourselves? How to work this out?
Oh God, it was terrifying. I mean, no one thought it was a good idea. So,
let me ask you, if you have a really good 6-figure salary working for a big corporation and your wife's pregnant and you tell people that you're going to quit your job and start a business in an industry where you've never worked before, what do you think most people's reaction is?
Oh, yeah.
I had a conversation with my dad the day I got my redundancy. And, what he said to me, I'll never forget. He was like, I always figured as long as I had a job, everything would be okay. As long as there was money coming through the door, everything would be okay. And, our sort of thinking at the time was the opposite, which was now that we're done, now that I'm done with this job, I can focus full time on this and, really try and push for growth. But there was a lot of risk there, and there was a lot of, there would have been a lot more worry on our part, but we had a pretty good plan, and we had a backup plan, and we sort of knew what we had to do in order to get the business going and to make the lifestyle sustainable.
The other thing I remember is we used this framework where we literally wrote down, okay, what is the worst thing that can happen in each scenario and what you do about it, and you realized you can sort of get you can kind of figure anything out. So the worst thing that happens, you move to Bali, your business crashes and burns, you completely run out of money. Okay, well, what do you do about that? You don't spend a lot of money so that you have a long time. You maintain good contacts with people that you used to work with to make sure that if you need to kind of restart that process, you do it again. You leave on really good terms from your employers, things like that. So we did consider all of that, and I don't think we fully covered every risk, but we tried to make sure we thought them all through.
Yeah. And it's funny because when you do an exercise like that, you start to realize that your backup plan, like what you would do if everything went to hell, is probably the same thing that you're doing. So the backup plan was to move back to either New York or London and try and get jobs in finance again. And that's what we had. So there wasn't a whole lot, at the end of the day, there wasn't a whole lot at risk, if you know what I mean.
We also spent a lot of time making sure that we had no debt. We had, kind of minimal expenses. We did a lot of that because I think you have a lot more fears if you have a lot of very big financial obligations in your first couple months.
I think that's huge for people trying to bootstrap their business, really to have minimal expenses, minimal kind of commitments to things that are going to tie them down in that regard. What are some examples of how you guys went about while you were in London and then once you made the jump to Bali, Indonesia, in terms of really bootstrapping, saving money and making sure that you were as efficient as possible with your expenditures?
Well, I think a lot of it was just around the planning side of it. So, sitting down with the Excel spreadsheet and putting down all your expenses and what you thought your income was going to be and what your savings was, and really understanding where you have flexibility with your finances and where you don't. And also understanding what the business needed to do, like how it needed to perform in order to hit your targets. And then, a lot of it was just busting our butts trying to make sure that the business met the goals.
Okay. And then once you guys got to, is it Bali or Bali?
It depends on whether you're American or British.
Okay.
Bali, I think, is the better way of saying it, which is not always how we.
It is crazy. You look at how different languages and different people pronounce the names of different cities, and it's just kind of the whole cultural differences between how people view things. Kind of interesting. Yeah. So what are some of the challenges you guys found once you arrived in Bali in terms of kind of getting settled, some of the culture shock, things along those lines?
Well, probably the biggest problem we had was with internet speed in the beginning. This is a couple years ago. I guess, when did we first come here? Like 2010?
Yeah.
And at the time, the internet was not nearly as good as it is now. And, we both have these memories of this first house that we rented and sitting in the office looking outside in Ubud and watching these big storm clouds come rolling in and madly trying to respond to emails before the storm rolled in, because you knew as soon as it started raining, the internet was going to go out for 6 hours. there was sort of nothing you could do about it.
Well, and we'd lead really crazy hours sometimes, in the first house we rented, because it wasn't raining from midnight to 6 a.m. and that was when you needed to do work. And I mean, we moved really fast. I think we were in that house for 2 months because it didn't have as good an internet connection and there was not much you could do about it. But it was it gave us a real wake up call that you have to really vet that in some of these third world countries, because otherwise you completely can't do anything unless you've got essentially a good internet connection and a good backup to that good internet connection, which is what we have had ever since.
Yeah.
It's crazy how enabling and how disabling the internet can be. It lets you work abroad, live abroad, and kind of live the lives like you guys are. But it can also just completely crush your soul when you can't get that Wi-Fi connection.
Absolutely.
So you guys moved to Bali in 2010, and have you been there since 2010?
No, we were here for about a year and a half, and then we moved down to Argentina, and we were in Mendoza for about 9 months. That's the wine region. That's where our second son was born. And then we moved to Buenos Aires for, again, about 9 months or so. And then we moved back to Bali, maybe almost a year ago, like 10 months ago.
And interspersed in there, we spent a bunch of months in Rio in Brazil.
Yeah.
So you're traveling, you're having kids, you're running a business. How do you do it? I know a lot of people have issues just traveling or just running a business. How does it happen, or how does it really work having the kids in the picture in terms of managing your life and your business?
Well, we don't really have a travel sort of set up anymore. So we live in different places for kind of a year, 9 months a year, but it would be completely impossible for us to run a business unless we have the kids in school and with babysitters, which you can't really do if you're just on the road. So that quickly for us we realized very fast that, we needed that structure and that setup so that we had normal 9 to 5 working days and coverage with the kids during those times.
Our original idea a bunch of years ago was that we could move every 3 months or so. And I think before you have kids, that's entirely possible. You can probably move every month if you want. But once you have kids, you need a little bit more of the stability. Kids like routine, and sort of our thinking now, like the model we're using now is more of a hub and spoke kind of thing. So right now, Bali is our hub, and we can travel from here, go to Vietnam on vacation for a week or 2 weeks or something like that, or go to Australia, go back to the US, go to Brazil. You can do all this traveling, but you need to have a home base.
So you're basically using Bali as the base then. So what I wanted to kind of get into now was some of the inner workings of Greenback Tax. You guys do tax services for expats like yourself living abroad. We've talked kind of about how you got into the business, but how has the business grown since you guys made that jump to the full-time role of running the business?
Been growing very, very aggressively. Since we first made the jump, we've probably grown 10 times or 15 times since we started full-time, both of us in the business.
And to give you a sense in terms of the number of people working, so we have customers in 100 plus countries. Last count, I think it was like 102. And we have about 30 people that are working for us. So it went from being the two of us plus one accountant to being, essentially about 25 accountants plus the two of us running the team, and about 5 members of the management team, which are all the people who do marketing, finance, billing, operations, customer service.
And everybody works virtually.
That is huge. That's got to be one of your main selling points, is that anyone that wants to work for you, they can live where they want. They can kind of live their life in the way that they structure it.
Yeah.
So how do you guys go about marketing? I know I've heard a good deal of word of mouth from some internet entrepreneurs who are living abroad, but how do you really work on spreading the business and really achieving this amazing J-curve kind of growth?
Well, our strategy around marketing is, if for anyone who's living abroad, essentially, there's not a lot of good tax information out there. So it's the IRS doesn't give you all the insight that you need to know just to kind of get your taxes done right, or even understand how you should structure things so that you aren't paying an arm and a leg. So what we do is we do a tremendous amount of research that we publish and share with people. So we, post different articles written by the accountants on our team 3 times a week. We post one video or infographic or case study another time a week. So we're basically just producing a ton of really useful content. And so our approach is very much around letting people who are looking for that kind of information find us, realize that we know what we're doing, that we can translate it for people in a way that they can understand and empowers them. And from there, what we tend to find is we've got lots of people who find us when they're even just still maybe considering moving abroad, read what we have to say in terms of advice about how to do it, and then, essentially follow our tax advice all the way through to when they need tax prep, and then we're sort of the natural choice. So it's all around kind of the, marketing approach of being someone that is a useful, valuable resource that then turns into the obvious choice for your tax prep needs.
Okay, that's perfect. So you're really running a content kind of style where you really educate the users.
Yeah.
What are your roles in the business right now as a husband and wife running the business? Who's responsible for what? Who wears the pants?
Well, because we both have MBAs, we're extremely structured around things, and the business is, I don't know if you've heard the term kind of SOP, but we've structured the business so that there's standard operating procedures around everything that everyone does day to day. So that essentially there's, a lot of best practices. And then we split it up. We both, we do a strategy document every year, but then every 6 months we reevaluate it. And we both literally sit together, do that entire thing. It's, it takes forever, to do. And then we split up, and Dave does all the finance and account and management, and I do all the marketing and operations.
Do you think that's important if you're having a partnership, whether you're in a relationship or not, that you kind of set boundaries on who's working on what so that you don't run all over each other's toes?
I think it's important, because not necessarily because you're worried about stepping on each other's toes, but because once your team grows, they need to know who to come to on what. So for example, before we had a lot of it really structured as to who was doing what, everyone who was working for us would come to both of us about everything. And it meant that you can get half as much done, so if you're both kind of weighing in on every decision. So, I don't think we've had such a big problem kind of stepping on each other's toes, but we've definitely found that unless we divide and conquer, we can't be that productive.
Okay. So another question I had for you guys is that there's not a whole lot of married couples out there that are really running businesses together. Usually one or the other is kind of in charge. How does it work for you guys in terms of your relationship? I know there's the whole personal and professional side of things. How does that work?
I don't know. I guess in a lot of ways it's a great thing, because we work together, and then we play with the kids together in the afternoon and evening and all that kind of stuff. So you get to spend a lot of good time with each other and with the family and everything like that. The old rule for married couples is, you go out on your date night and you can't talk about kids and you can't talk about work. Usually people have a hard time with the kids side of it, but when you're running a business together, the work side of it can be difficult as well. But I don't know, I guess it's just about having good communication and knowing who's doing what and trusting each other to do it.
I actually, I always find it interesting, because I've spoken with a lot of people where only one person is the entrepreneur and the other person is maybe helping raise the kids or working in a traditional job or, whatever, maybe freelancing. But with one person is living this kind of lifestyle. And I actually think that probably would have a harder impact on a relationship than doing it together, because it's a very stressful, very emotional thing to start a business. And unless you understand what the other person's going through, I don't think you can possibly relate or really know how to react to them day to day. So, I think that in some ways it's a real strength that there's never going to be a time where I wake up and say, oh my God, you wouldn't believe this, and I'm really nervous about this. And Dave would say, I don't know what you mean. It just never happens. You kind of get each other. So
the risks and the successes we can share because we're both so involved that we just understand them.
The downside is that you talk about work all the time.
But it's a tax business, so it's super fascinating.
Oh, yeah. Breathtaking. What do you guys do to get out of the zone, get out of the work mindset? What are some of your hobbies or things that you guys really do just to enjoy yourself and kick back?
I don't know. Can people with kids have hobbies?
Yeah, we have 2 kids. We don't have hobbies.
That is fair. 2 kids in a business. So your hobbies are cooking dinner and sleeping, right?
No, we do. Like we try to be real strict about not working on weekends. And that's, family time. So every Saturday we go on an adventure. Our 4-year-old calls it Adventure Saturdays, and we go and do something fun in Bali, whether it's just going to a new beach or, I don't know. I think his favorite was when we went on the submarine ride. Yeah. So we try to do a lot of that kind of stuff, and we travel a bit too.
But like for instance, yesterday after work, we were just playing in the backyard with the kids. Our 4-year-old said he wanted to do a picnic, so we were doing cucumber and cheese as an appetizer before dinner, and then we start throwing around a football, and that's sort of how you unwind or you relax, is playing with the kids and trying to not think about or talk about the work stuff.
And we very theoretically do things like yoga and stand-up paddle on a regular basis. So that's kind of on the list of things that you want to think you do every week, but really don't.
That's actually one of the things that I wanted to ask you guys about. So a lot of people, they're living their lives. Everyone has dreams. Everyone has goals. What are some of your goals or dreams that you guys have? Things that you want to accomplish in your life, experiences that you want to have? I think that's really important for people, both in terms of their professional and their personal well-being, is to have these lofty goals that they go for. What are you guys going for?
I don't know.
It's a good question.
One of our sort of shared goals is, we want Greenback to be a great company. And, that was one of the things we wrote down from the beginning was, we want it to be a business that we're proud of. We want other people who are involved in it to be proud of it as well. So, that's sort of one of the business goals. Sort of what we've always said is we want to live an adventurous life. And, an adventurous life isn't always a fun life. It's not always a good life. It's got ups and downs, but we get to experience a lot of things that, other people probably can't even imagine. Traveling with a little kid is an amazing thing because everything they see, they're seeing for the first time. We were at the chocolate factory a couple weeks ago, and our 20-month-old, he was 20 months at the time, saw an elephant going pee-pee. And he's running around telling everybody that would listen that, there was this huge elephant over there and it just went pee-pee on the ground. And it was hilarious. You've got, 10 Balinese people running after this kid because he wants to show them. And he's just laughing hysterically. They're all laughing hysterically. And, it's just like, most people would see that and think, wow, that's a little gross. And here you have this little kid who's at a chocolate factory and doesn't care 2 bits about any of the chocolate stuff because there's an elephant. Yeah. So I guess the short answer is, the goal is to live an adventurous life. And, for different people, that might mean different things. But for us, it's just seeing and doing things and, experience all these different things that we get to experience.
That's one of the huge things about owning your own business. You really get to kind of define, not completely, but more or less how your life looks. And that's part of the reason that I wanted to talk to you guys and get you on the show. And I think it's interesting, going back to your kids for a sec, how do you think the fact that their parents are building something, they're growing a business, they're helping other people, and you're bringing them along for the ride, how do you think that'll affect your kids growing up, getting to experience these different cultures, these entrepreneurial ventures? What do you think?
I mean, I think it's great for them. Obviously, we're biased because we chose this lifestyle and we really believe in it. But, our 4-year-old, obviously the 20-month-old to a lesser extent, but our 4-year-old, he very much, he really understands the concept of kind of entrepreneurship in a way that I just can't explain fully. But, he sees opportunities, as, he understands what we do, and he understands that, people are out there, and everyone from kind of the person who's selling, chicken satay on a cart outside on the street to somebody who is running a shop. He kind of gets that in a way that I don't think that he would if he lived in more of a kind of traditional setting. But he also just really doesn't have any biases around different cultures. You'd never hear him describing something as weird. You go back to the US a lot and you hear, kids talk about, oh, well, that kid did this thing that's weird and that kid did this thing that's weird. And weird is anything that they're not used to. Whereas he just is so used to, things that are crazy happening to him all the time in his context that it's like, he just sort of takes the best of all of it. So I think that's really good. I think what's obviously very unfortunate is that, we'd love to be able to find a way to do this one with him still having more of a day-to-day relationship with grandparents, with cousins, with aunts and uncles. And we do what we can on Skype and going home as much as we can. But that's where that is not perfect, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, definitely. That's one of the challenges. Like I'm looking to try to get out to Southeast Asia, hopefully within the next couple of months, Chiang Mai, Thailand, that kind of area. But then you're just so far away from your family, and it's so expensive to come back to the States. It's so much more convenient to be there. There's those challenges. What would you suggest to someone that's considering making the move? They're considering kind of jumping abroad and going to live the more adventurous, bootstrapped lifestyle. What should they consider before they really go for it?
I don't think it needs to be that cut and dried, personally. I think one thing that we told ourselves early on is you can change your mind, so get out, just go do it. And if you don't like it, come back. And, you don't have to kind of make this decision that I'll be gone for a year or I'll be gone for 2 years or whatever it is. You can sort of play it by ear and see how you feel about it. So, I think in that regard, sometimes people see it as an all or nothing type proposition, and that's really scary. Whereas if you see it as something that you can try out, see if it works for you, and there's no shame in it not working, it goes easier for people, I think.
And, one of the ways you can sort of get comfortable with some of that is if you just sit down and write out what your fears are, and then you write out what the worst possible outcome would be, or what you would do if the worst outcome came to be. It really helps put things in perspective, because usually it's the unknown that's the scariest. And once you start to define what could happen, on a positive side or a negative side, it really just clarifies your thinking around things.
The other thing I would say, and this is very logistical, is get travel insurance. I mean, I'm amazed at all of these people that kind of, go and they go somewhere completely, somewhere where they have diseases that people don't think exist anymore in the world, and, ride motorbikes around where, there's all of these risks and they don't have travel insurance. Just invest in getting travel insurance, because that's one of the biggest things that you need to protect yourself against, is kind of getting sick abroad or having something unexpected happen. And if you're covered against that, it's a very low likelihood, but if you're not covered against it, you're just always going to be worrying about it. So just tick that off your list, do it, and then forget about it.
That might make a great long tail keyword post for the Greenback Tech Service blog.
Well, we don't do anything with travel insurance, but yeah.
So I wanted to ask you guys, why Indonesia? What really motivated you guys to go there and to go to Bali? Out of you've got the entire world as your playground. Why'd you choose there?
Well, we first came here at the recommendation of one of our friends from business school, who had lived here for on and off for 3 years or so when he was traveling with his family. The reason we came back after Argentina was it's just a really nice lifestyle, especially for the kids. So tonight we're going to meet up with some friends down by the beach, and the kids are all just going to sit down in the sand and start digging, go down by the water, fill up the bucket with water, pull out seashells, do all that kind of stuff, which if you're 4 years old, 2 years old, that's probably the most fun you could possibly have. And, for us, it's great because, you're sitting on the beach in Bali, your kids are completely entertained, and it's a pretty nice lifestyle. Some of the other places, more city places, things like that, it's harder to keep the kids as entertained. Go to a restaurant in Buenos Aires or a vineyard in Mendoza or something like that, and 15 minutes into the meal, your kids are starting to misbehave because it's not that interesting for them.
We also just wanted a real outdoorsy lifestyle for them. So we wanted something where, what your kid does when they come home is go outside and dig around in the dirt and play in sand and, ride cars around and things like that. And Bali's a great place to do that. And also, it's very peaceful. It's, people are very happy here. It's a kind of very, Zen-like is kind of a strange way of describing it, because it certainly has its inconveniences for sure. But, there's just a general kind of feeling of calm that allows you to really focus on your business, because you just have that kind of underlying sense of, peacefulness. It sounds a little bit ridiculous, but it's a little true here.
Yeah, just kind of the slower pace of life, a little bit more quality of life and enjoying yourself.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I've heard, and I wanted to hear from you guys because you're the experts on this. I've heard that if you're out of the U.S. for a certain amount of time, something like 330 days, you can get out of paying U.S. taxes. Could you guys kind of elaborate on that for people thinking about living abroad?
Sure. What you're talking about is known as the physical presence test. And basically the way it works is if you're physically present in a foreign country for 330 days in a 365-day period, then you would qualify for the foreign earned income exclusion filed on Form 2555. And for the 2013 tax year, so the taxes, the April deadline that just passed, you would be able to exclude $97,600 of your income from U.S. tax. Now, if you're an entrepreneur, depending on how you're set up, if you're a sole proprietor or you don't have a corporate structure or you have a U.S. LLC or something like that, you're going to be responsible for self-employment taxes. So you are going to have to pay 15.3% because you're paying both the employee and the employer portion of the self-employment taxes. And that's a cash expense. So people have to know about that one because that comes out before the foreign earned income exclusion.
Yeah, totally went over my head. So if people are thinking about doing that, you guys should check out greenbacktaxservices.com because they have a little bit better information than we can really provide here. But
sorry, we've got a whole guide on our site for entrepreneurs. So, if you're thinking about going overseas and starting a business and doing that, just have a look at our site. You can download the guide. It's a free guide. It's like 15 pages or something like that, but it goes into a lot of detail.
And of course, we'll link to all that in the show notes. I was actually checking out your site before we got on the call, and I want to say it's a really well-designed site. It looks really good. You guys did a good job.
Oh, thanks. I'd love to take credit for it, but that was all Carrie.
One little piece of feedback that I had that might help you guys a little was on your customer review section. I thought it was really great, and you guys have a ton of super satisfied customers. What if you put pictures of the people where they're living, kind of like on the beach or in the rainforest? I think that would really help people that are thinking about living abroad or living abroad to kind of engage a little bit more with your brand and kind of the freedom lifestyle you guys represent.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah. The hard thing is if somebody writes a nice review for you or gives you a testimonial or something like that, generally we just say thank you. We don't want to bother them again. Hey, do you mind sending me a picture also so we can put that on the site? Some people are happy to do that. Some people are, they don't like having themselves out there as much.
Okay, that makes sense. Good point. So you guys have been really helpful for me and really helpful for the audience in terms of learning a little bit more about kind of the joys and challenges of living abroad. I just had one more question for both of you two. And I think it'd be interesting if you would both answer it separately. So my question would be, if you had one piece of advice for entrepreneurs that were getting started with bootstrapping their business, what would it be so that they can avoid wasting time or really to make their business grow faster?
Do you want to go first or you want me to go first?
Yeah,
first. I think especially if you're going overseas, if you're trying to bootstrap it and you're going to go somewhere the low cost or, something like that, you should spend the time to write out your budget to really understand what the financial picture is going to look like so that you know how long you're going to have to do it. You'll know how long your runway is, how many months you can live before the business really needs to be kicking off revenue for you. And then you need to write out your business goals to adjust to that. So, if you're moving to Thailand and you got 10 grand in the bank and you think that'll last you, 10 months or 20 months or something like that, you need to write out what the budget's going to be and how that's all going to work. And then you need to build your business goals to match that budget. That make sense?
Yeah. What's the cost of living like for you guys in Indonesia, just for people that are interested?
Well, we spend a lot, but you don't have to.
Yeah, like we know guys that are here that are spending like $500 a month all in for their living expenses. We've got a house and a pool and kids in school and private tuition and all that kind of stuff. So it's, probably a lot less than it would be in the U.S., but it's probably a lot more than your average bootstrapper would need to spend.
Okay, so you could get by on about $500 or so bucks a month and be surviving.
Yeah.
My advice, maybe controversial, is to really not kind of get lured into the concept of cheap labor. So you hear a lot of people that start these businesses bootstrapping and they're like, hey, I can get this $100 a month VA in India or in the Philippines, and they're going to be able to do all these things for me. And then you talk to them about that 3 months later, and it's like, I just spent 24 hours a day managing an $100 a month person, and they didn't get anything done, and everything they got done was wrong. And, I tried to put them on customer service, which is just the worst idea in the entire world. And they pissed off every customer that I had, and people really get what they pay for, I think. So I think that's a mistake that people often make. And it sounds like it's going to sort of solve your world. And I've never, ever heard of anyone actually having success with that. I've just heard a lot of people talking about it and then realizing a year later that they just wasted not a lot of money, but a lot of time on, people that really couldn't help them a lot, that didn't have the skills they needed. Even if you're extraordinarily good at standard operating procedures and managing people against clocks. I mean, all of that stuff is I just don't think that you can get people who are unskilled to do any sort of skilled jobs and replace anything you're doing. I think you have to kind of do it yourself until you can afford to hire people who really can sort of take the reins and help you.
Yeah, and that opportunity cost of your time is huge.
Yeah.
I've heard you guys have a pretty good system for vetting the accountants that you're bringing on. What do you guys do? Sorry, as a last question, I guess.
Well, we do a number of different things, but, we have a test that all the accountants have to take, and then we have case studies where they have to prepare actual returns that we have one of our other CPAs, review to make sure that they know how to do what our customers need them to do. We've got a background check, we've got interviews with a number of different people on the team. So it's not an easy process, and it is a process that we've designed to try and weed people out, to get time wasters out of the system before we ever have them join the company.
I think that's huge towards really making your company culture and company be a success. And I want to thank you guys. I want to thank you, David and Carrie, for coming on the show today and sharing some of your insight with living abroad, with foreign taxes, some of the challenges with building the business and keeping your family together. If people want to reach out to you, where's the best way for them to reach out and thank you?
Well, if you have tax questions or anything like that, the best thing to do is just have a look at our website. We've got tons of information on there. If people have questions about other things, just ping me an email. My email is McKeegan, McKeegan, @greenbacktaxservices.com.
And mine's the same, only starting with a C. So C McKeegan @greenbacktaxservices.com.
And of course, we'll be putting that in the show notes, guys. businessandbootstrapping.com, session 9. And thanks so much, guys, for coming on here. I hope people get some really, really great content on this. And really, it helps people that are thinking about taking the jump to get their feet wet and just go for it. I want to thank you guys so much and wish you guys an excellent day.
Yeah, you too.
You too.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for listening to the show and hope you really enjoyed it. You can check out more great podcasts and blog posts at businessandbootstrapping.com. And I can't wait to talk to you guys soon. See ya.